Welcome to the From Lab to Patient, Garage to Market podcast with your host, Phil Crowley. In each episode, we will discuss professionals serving the tech startup market and the various issues of importance to those companies. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, CrowleyLawLLC.com. Now here's the host of From Lab to Patient, Garage to Market, Phil Crowley.
Hi, thanks for tuning into our podcast today. We focus on providing helpful information for founders and those who seek to become involved in the startup world in life sciences and in technology. And our guests bring their expertise in certain areas, as well as their experience in the business and startup world, to give all of you a sense of what it's all about from the inside. Today, I'm happy to welcome to the show a friend, a former co-worker, who's also a client and a very successful pharmaceutical and biotech executive, Krista McKerracher, who's also the founder of her own consulting firm, Fig Advisory. Krista, welcome.
Thank you, Phil.
It's very nice to have you here. You know, I always like to start out by finding out how people got involved in the life sciences in the first place. What did you train in as an undergraduate?
I did, it was a degree called Applied Health Sciences. It was basically a pre-med degree, and I knew from the time I was a little kid that I was interested in biology and chemistry and life sciences. That was just something that I always gravitated to, and I had intended to go to med school. And when I finished my undergrad degree, a classmate of mine got a job in as a pharmaceutical sales rep, and I had no money at the time. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do this for a year. And I applied, and I thought I would go back to med school. And 40 years later, I never made it to med school, and I built a career in pharmaceuticals.
Well, Krista, could you give us a bit of an overview of your career, how things went, so that people who are considering getting into the pharma and biotech space have an idea of what actually happens?
Sure. I joined the pharmaceutical industry right after my undergrad degree. And I was intending to go to medical school, but I needed some money. So I got a job as a pharmaceutical sales rep, and I thought I would do that for a year and then go back to med school. And 40 years later, I was still in the industry. I started as a sales rep in Toronto, Ontario, in Canada, and I carried the bag, as they say, for 2 years. And then I moved into a hospital sales rep job where you are selling, the same types of products, but they're more hospital-based products and specialists. And then in 1988, there was an ad in the paper that said, "Join the biotech revolution." And I responded to the ad in the paper, because this was before the internet, and said, I want to join the biotech revolution. And I was employee number 3 at OrthoBiotech Canada. And I think that just gave me a foundation that I built my career on, because I started as an early employee in a whole venture, and I got to wear a lot of different hats during my time with OrthoBiotech, and it eventually led me to the U.S. with Johnson & Johnson, which was the parent company, and through a series of marketing roles.
Now, tell me a little bit about your roles up in Canada and what you perceive as perhaps the difference between working in Canada as you were as a Canadian citizen and coming to the United States and working in the United States.
Sure. I think, because I was employee number 3 at OrthoBiotech, I got to be involved in a lot of different things. I essentially was what you would call an MSL, or medical science liaison, when we launched the very first monoclonal antibody, orthoclone OKT3, when monoclonal antibodies were made in mouse societies. And I traveled across Canada with a tray of slides and explained what monoclonal antibody technology was in transplant centers, because the drug was used for transplant rejection and kidney, heart, and lung transplants and liver transplants.
So this was basically a mouse antibody, but that it was effective in humans, right?
Yes. And it was the first sort of very targeted anti-rejection therapy for people having transplants, and was launched in the late 1980s. And from there, I had a chance to work on recombinant erythropoietin, which Johnson & Johnson had licensed all of the rights to in Canada. In the US, it was just the non-dialysis rights. And that gave me an opportunity to work on the very first recombinant protein that was available clinically for patients. And I was involved in launching it for dialysis patients. But then I very quickly moved into looking at new indications, because we had a sense that the drug could be used in multiple different areas. And that's really what took me into the oncology space, where I spent most of my career, because we saw a big opportunity with cancer patients and anemia.
And how did, for those who are not in the biotech space, how does erythropoietin function with respect to patients who may have anemia from chemotherapy?
It was a recombinant version of the protein that we all make that stimulates red blood cell production. And most of that erythropoietin is made in the kidney. So people who were on dialysis in renal failure became profoundly anemic and needed basically replacement therapy so that they didn't have to be transfused continuously. And cancer patients similarly can become very anemic because of the disease itself or the types of drugs. And so erythropoietin like agents were used in cancer, and also in autologous blood donation before surgery was another indication.
So in other words, they were able to use the drug to stimulate extra red blood cell production.
Exactly.
And then bank the person's own blood rather than taking blood from a blood bank.
Yes.
And give the person back basically their own souped up blood.
Yes. And that was very popular back when we still didn't have testing for all of the potential bloodborne viruses like HIV and Hep C, all the hepatitis family viruses. So there was a lot of interest in autologous blood donation at that time.
Right. And then where did your travels next take you?
I took an assignment in the U.S. In the international marketing group in New Jersey. And I moved to New Jersey in 1996. And I spent 4 years working in global marketing, working on EPO, or as we called it, a recombinant erythropoietin. And I also worked on a couple of joint ventures with some startups. One had a blood substitute, which was a perfluorocarbon emulsion, which unfortunately failed because of toxicity. And I worked on a couple of small oncology products with biotech partners to J&J. And then
Krista, if I may interrupt, what was that like in terms of you being from the big company and you're working with small companies? Was there a clash of cultures, or were you able to overcome that?
Great question. Yeah, there's definitely a difference between big and small, and it's something that I took away or took with me throughout my career. First working on a big pharma, and then going to work with some of the smaller companies who were hoping to partner with big pharma. I think that the things that you worry about are different. Your tolerance of risk is different, I believe, in big pharma compared to startups. And but you have to work through those to have successful partnerships. And small biotech companies are integral to the success of big pharma.
All right. So after global marketing, where did you next go, and how did the global marketing role help you in your next spot?
Well, my next move was still with Johnson & Johnson, and I moved to one of the other subsidiary companies called OrthoBiotech, which sat in a different part of Johnson & Johnson in the medical device sector, not in the pharmaceutical sector. And there I was running the plasma fractions business. And the hope that J&J had was that they could revitalize and rebuild the plasma fractions business. But it turned out not to be a great business decision. And after 2 years, we decided to close it down. And it's at that time that I left Johnson & Johnson and ended up at my next company, Novartis Oncology.
Well, tell us about, I'm very interested in that because as we both know, you and my wife, Dr. Diane Young, had the opportunity to work together both at Johnson & Johnson and at Novartis. Well, Krista, could you explain a little bit about the difference between the cultures? You came from Johnson & Johnson, went over to Novartis. They're two very big companies. For people who've never been in a large company, they may say, well, the big company, so it must be the same. What was your experience?
I found the companies to be very different. One is a big U.S. conglomerate, and the other one is a Swiss company. So right off the bat, there's differences because of where the headquarters are. And, most of the senior management at Novartis were Switzerland. We used to joke, Switzerland is where everything is either mandatory or forbidden. So there was a lot of cultural differences. But I absolutely loved my time at Novartis. We were a small entrepreneurial unit within Novartis, just focused on oncology. We had our own CEO, our own head of development. And I came into a global marketing role, and I was given an opportunity to handle the final development decisions and then the worldwide launch of a drug that was a niche drug for iron overload, but one that had a profound impact on patients. And it was just immensely rewarding to know that you were bringing something to market that was so transformational for patients with underlying hemoglobinopathies like thalassemia and sickle cell disease, where iron overload was an enormous problem and led to early death.
And then what followed Novartis?
Well, I was at Novartis for 14 years, and Novartis gave me a very unusual opportunity. I was a career marketing person, and one day David Epstein, who was the CEO, came in and said, we're doing a massive reorg in development, and I've put you on the slate to be a franchise head in development. And I looked at him like he was crazy. I said, but I'm a marketing person. And I think because of my background coming out of Canada, where I sort of wore a lot of hats and I ran medical affairs for a while and everything, he thought I was up to the task, and he really wanted somebody who was not an MD to be one of the 5 franchise heads. And so for the last 10 years of my career at Novartis, I was a franchise head for hematology, oncology, and development. And I had all of the development functions, clinical, medical affairs, regulatory stats, project management, precision medicine, clinical pharmacology, all the traditional functions for the franchise reporting into me. And it was, again, an immensely rewarding job. It shows that it's not about your technical skills always, it's about your leadership skills and being able to bring all the parts of the orchestra who need to play their instruments well together and, in tune.
Now, I see that there are so many opportunities for problems to arise in organizations when people can't get along with each other, or people are not aligned and sort of rowing in the same direction. And you seem to have grown a lot in terms of your capability of actually understanding those human dynamics, which are so important in business success, particularly for large companies, but for small companies as well. So you were the franchise head, a really substantive goal. And before we go on, I want to go on to see what followed that development in your career. I'd like to take just a minute to talk a bit about Crowley Law. We are a boutique law firm that is focused on the needs of life sciences and other technology entrepreneurs and helping them realize their dreams, to take Great ideas from the laboratory bench to the patient's bedside, or from the garage to the marketplace, with a view to use technology to enrich the lives of thousands or millions of people. As a former physicist trained at Stevens Institute of Technology and Harvard University, I'm acutely aware of how difficult it is to generate new knowledge. And as a lawyer, business lawyer for Johnson & Johnson for a number of years, I know how difficult it can be to take those good ideas and get them into the marketplace. So our boutique law firm is focused on providing big company expertise, but the care and attention that can only come from a boutique firm. Please see our website, CrowleyLawLLC.com, and see some of the free resources we have out there that are available for you. And if you have questions, please contact us at info@CrowleyLawLLC.com. We're here to help. So, Krista, now let's get back to your career. So you've had a fantastic, this is a very substantive job at Novartis. What induced you to leave?
I think one of the key things that you have to grapple with throughout your career is you have to love what you're doing. And if you don't love what you're doing the wrong thing, because we spend so much of our time working. And I got to the point where I had been doing the same thing for a long time. I loved my team, but I found that I just wasn't loving going to work every single day. I needed to make a change. And I was eligible to take early retirement. So I did. And I had planned to just do a little bit of consulting and figure out what I want to do next. And then I was introduced to CRISPR Therapeutics up in Boston, and ended up going to CRISPR for 2 years when I really hadn't intended to going back to corporate life. But it was, again, 2 very, very rewarding career years of my life, commuting weekly from New York to Boston to work at CRISPR.
Could you speak a little bit about CRISPR technology? Because there is so much, in my mind, magic about biotechnology these days, because as we peer more and more deeply into the human biochemistry, we learn so much. And it reminds me of the early days and the current days of physicists, where the more we learn, the more we understand we don't know. And it seems like it's sort of like that, but CRISPR seems to have hit a sweet spot in terms of developing technology. And I think it would be helpful for our audience to understand a little bit more from your perspective what it does.
Sure. So I was working for CRISPR Therapeutics, which was one of the foundational companies that came out of the Doudna-Charpentier discovery, and they were awarded the Nobel Prize for this. And I was brought in because CRISPR Therapeutics was using CRISPR technology to try to cure sickle cell disease and thalassemia, which were blood diseases I had worked on extensively at Novartis. And if you think about CRISPR, it's really the first of what are now several different gene editing technologies available. But CRISPR is like biological scissors. And you can design the technology so that you direct the scissors to cut into a gene in a specific area. You use what's called a leader sequence, so that it's very specific and attaches and cuts in a specific spot. Application for thalassemia and sickle cell was to disrupt the gene that turned fetal hemoglobin off when we're born. So when we're born, we're all expressing fetal hemoglobin, or HbF, and it gradually, over the first 6 months or so of our lives, is replaced with adult hemoglobin. And there's the gene that turns it off is has been identified, and we use CRISPR to cut into that gene. And by disrupting that gene, it turned fetal hemoglobin back on. And I was there through the IND stage and took the technology with the team at CRISPR and our partner Vertex into the clinic. And I stayed for the first 2 patients being transplanted, the first one in Germany and the second one in the US. And since that time, last December, the product was actually approved by the FDA because it was so effective in basically curing sickle cell and thalassemia for these patients, which is absolutely amazing for somebody who had to be transfused as a thalassemia patient probably every 2 weeks of their life, becoming transfusion independent, or for a sickle cell patient or somebody living with sickle cell, once they started expressing fetal hemoglobin, it suppressed the sickle hemoglobin that caused all of the pain crises and sequelae that make the disease so horrible. So it was enormously rewarding to be involved in that program.
All right. So you had a wonderful, fulfilling role in dealing with bringing to the market, at least bring to the clinic, a therapy that actually resolved a very painful and difficult to deal with disease. And then you moved on yet again. You're very entrepreneurial. So what did entrepreneurial self inspire you to do at the next juncture?
Well, I was commuting every week to Boston because my husband was still living and working in New York. And commuting, for those who have done it, you know that it's very tiring and it wears on you. So 2 years of that was enough for me, and I decided to re-retire at that time. And I had already formed my consulting business, Fig Advisory, and I tapped into my network. And that's a piece of advice I would give everybody: is spend time cultivating your network. Over the course of your career, you're going to meet all sorts of people who have all sorts of experiences and end up in many different places. And just by talking to people in my network, I ended up with some very interesting consulting work. And then again, from tapping into my network, I ended up with some corporate board opportunities as well. And those have been sort of the next stage of my life and equally rewarding.
Well, that's good. It seems, though, Krista, that one of the lessons that I would take from your life and your career is that if you work hard and get a lot of experience and be willing to reach high for additional opportunities and responsibilities, even if you're a bit unsure. I think your story with respect to David Epstein coming in and tapping you to be the worldwide franchise leader for the hematologic products is an indication that, you may not have felt that you were ready for it, but David saw something in you that you had, and it seems like setting high expectations of yourself and having confidence in yourself, which you had based on all the success that you had in your career to that point.
Yeah, I think, advice to my younger self, you need to build a great foundation. You don't have to know what you're going to be doing 10 years from now, because, there's all sorts of forks in the road, and usually you'll make the right decision. Sometimes if you make the wrong decision, you have to course correct. But if you have a good foundation to your career, you have the experience and skills to do bigger and, I would say better things, because I really enjoyed getting more responsibility corporately. I think it's important that people not be afraid to take lateral moves to gain different experience and different skill sets, and not always be aiming to, shoot up every 6 months and aspire to have a promotion every 6 months. You need to spend time learning and proving that you can own the results that you're delivering.
Right. And the other thing, of course, is your ability to pull together a team and get them oriented. And we both know from the relationship that OrthoBiotech and Johnson & Johnson had with Amgen back in the 1990s, when there were a series of not just multi-million, but multi-$100 million lawsuits going back and forth between the two parties as a result, I think, of some bad feelings that resulted from the initial investment. And so I have always been a fan of really focusing on the human side of transactions and helping to show respect to people as we move forward in doing deals.
Like,
Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
oh, I'm just going to say absolutely. And I can contrast that to my time at CRISPR, where we had a development partnership with Vertex. And you don't always agree on everything, but you find ways to work it out. And I think the CRISPR Vertex partnership was a very successful one and led to the rapid approval of the product, which I think is Casgevy now, is the trade name. And it's because we had respect for each other, and we worked hard at the relationship, and we worked hard at conflict resolution when the two companies didn't agree on the path forward.
Right. Now, you gave some advice for executives in terms of what they should do. Do you have some advice on things to avoid?
Oh, yeah. I think you referred to sort of company politics earlier. I think you always have to be aware of politics and how they affect you and your job and those around you. But I think it's best to rise above them and not get into game playing, because you want to be your true authentic self, and you want to be, kind and genuine to people. And so I think, stay away from corporate games that might have short-term benefit to yourself, but long-term can hurt you. I've seen that quite a bit across companies.
How would your career is something that others in the pharma and biotech space would aspire to, because you've come through the management side, you've had senior roles, and now you were a member of a couple of boards. How is the focus of a director of a company different from the people who are in the management ranks?
It's very different. And, just starting from a board search, you have to basically rethink your whole CV or resume to focus on the experiences you have that could help a company, whether it's a public or private company, from a strategy and a governance perspective. So you're not operationally responsible, but you are responsible to, if it's a public company, the shareholders, to make sure the company is doing the right things in the right way, in legal ways. And that's a very important accountability. But you're not the person actually doing the work. You're a sounding board to the CEO, and you are representing the shareholders if it's a public company.
One other thing, I know, Krista, that you have been a very loyal and active alumna of your alma mater, and you had kind of a unique experience several years ago in attending the Nobel Prize ceremony for a professor from your alma mater. Can you tell us a little bit about that? That must have been tremendously exciting.
Oh, absolutely. So I did my undergrad degree at the University of Waterloo in Ontario, Canada. And I've been involved with the university since. I loved my time at Waterloo. I made lifelong friends there, and I got a great education that was the foundation, I think, of building my career. So I stayed involved with the university, and the president of the university was in New York, and I was invited to have breakfast with him. And it was just a case of being at the right place at the right time, because the breakfast was the same day that the Nobel Prizes were announced. And Donna Strickland, a physics professor from the University of Waterloo, won the Nobel Prize in physics in 2018. And because I was having breakfast with the university president that day, he said, we'd really love to have some alumni join the university team in Stockholm. Would you be interested in going? And it took me less than a nanosecond to say yes. And right after breakfast, I booked my ticket to go to Stockholm. And it was really a unique and great experience, because although we didn't attend the dinner with the king, just for, visiting dignitaries, etc., we got to go to all the Nobel Prize lectures across the spectrum of prizes, and all sorts of activities that are planned during Nobel Week. So it was really an amazing thing to be part of.
Well, you have certainly had a very successful career, Krista. Krista, you have grown up and been successful in an industry that has been characterized as kind of an old boys network. What advice would you give women executives, women entrepreneurs, as they try to break in and build careers like this successful career that you have built?
Yeah, I hope, Phil, that things are changing. Certainly when I started in the 80s, it really was an old boys network. There weren't a lot of women in senior management positions. And I think women were always judged a little bit differently than men. But I think now that it's changing, you see a lot more senior women in corporate life, and they become role models and mentors to younger men and women. And I think it's just helpful to see more people who, act like you and think like you at senior levels that can, provide judgment on what your skills are and where you need to develop better skills. Mm-hmm. And, I will always be involved volunteering for, I'm a volunteer with Springboard, which is an incubator for female entrepreneurs. And I find that very rewarding, because, everybody needs a coach and a truth teller in their life. And it's a way I can continue to give back now that I'm not working in corporate life full time.
Super. Well, Krista, thank you. I really appreciate your sharing your insights. I think it's very valuable for our viewers to understand what happens in the pharmaceutical biotech industry, what some of the opportunities are, your advice about being willing to take that next step, and also to be willing to broaden your areas of experience so that you're ready for the next opportunity when it comes. So that's it for this podcast. I want to thank Krista again for joining us today, and hope that you, our viewers, have found this beneficial in your thinking about addressing pharma, biotech, and technology startups.
Thank you, Phil.
You've been tuning into the From Lab to Patient, Garage to Market podcast with your host, Phil Crowley. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, crowleylawllc.com. If you found this information helpful, please subscribe, like, leave a positive review, and share with others.